we should continue with the path we set out on in October, which was when we discussed mandatory spay and neuter for all breeds.
Almost 70, there's 67 according to
67 cards. And I know the public is expecting to speak, and we'll give them that opportunity.
Presumably, I don't know this to be true, but the city clerk would know by virtue of pro or con, 67 people speak that are against, as I am, the proposed ordinance. For us to, the reason this is important to me, while everyone in the room needs to not leave early, because I left early that particular day that this was considered, and I thought this was coming back sometime later after we gathered more information.
So would we be tabling this breed-specific legislation and then bringing back a second proposal so that the council could take action on either or?
Certainly, you would be tabling this ordinance, which is breed-specific, and at a future meeting, you can consider all breeds, breed-specific, no breeds. You could agendize that to consider all the potentials and make a decision at that point based on whatever recommendations are considered.
So I'd be prepared to support the motion that directs staff to come back with options for the council to act on. One, obviously this one that would be tabled, but then also the one that would cover all breeds for mandatory spay and neuter.
What I'm prepared to do now, shockingly, if it's appropriate, is to ask for a second to vote this proposed ordinance down completely tonight. And then I'm convinced this is not the right way to approach this issue. We as a council gave a pathway forward on this issue. So if it is appropriate, Mayor and City Attorney, I would simply make a motion that we vote this proposed ordinance down. However, I'm of the feeling that the council, the majority of the council, is not prepared to support this ordinance.
I was going to say that the views of council members in regard to what we might attempt to do and what we might express the intention to do in the future with respect to mandatory spay neuter. Maybe you're already there in light of what various council members have said, but there are two council members who haven't spoken in question. The canvassing that was deemed at the time that it was first mentioned to us got to the action on the ordinance will be done in June.
I'm not familiar with the procedure that John is describing where we vote something down. I mean, I want to hear what every one of these people has to say. We're here to represent the community and have open minds and hear the facts.
Last week, I asked in written form for this item to be deferred. It wasn't accepted because of it was a council motion that brought it to the first reading, if I understand that ruling to have it tonight. I have some comments there. Just like Mr. Kennedy has his comments. I don't know if it's appropriate, but I just want the audience to know that I am just so grateful for all the comments. I mean, if you see the size of the staff report just for this one topic, I've never seen anything so thick. I don't believe in banning pit bulls or the mixed breeds. I have to admit that I have some mixed emotions about this ordinance. To single out pit bulls and the mixed breeds. But as a council, I know that we care about public safety, and I think all of you do as well. And then we have the state law to deal with that prohibits having local jurisdictions have breed to single out certain breeds. No, what I agree with is that we shouldn't go against that state law. I have another question that I have from all of you. Is this law fair? And what we're trying to do here, having a pit bull ordinance, I don't believe it is. To have a breed neutral law rather than
Jackie, you've been waiting too patiently, thank you.
Just in brief, I was not prepared to support tonight's agenda item as written or as proposed, similar to my opposition to the earlier action of the City Council that even brought this resolution forth for consideration tonight for the same reasons, namely the difficulty that the Pasadena Humane Society expressed to us in them being able to identify pit bulls and not pit bulls, but the pit bull mixed breeds, and the enforcement mechanisms by which, if passed, the resolution would require. I was more than happy to consider, if and when it comes before us, the non-breed specific mandatory spay neuter, and in fact do on its face agree with that, but I know that if that comes forward we will have significant public comment as well. And so although I'm not prepared to support the resolution tonight, I can be supportive of the action to table this discussion until it comes back again in June or thereafter. And I can't say that I'm totally clear on whether or not we needed a motion to table the discussion, but maybe we can clarify that.
The council has certainly not introduced an ordinance which had the effect of tabling or withdrawing the ordinance from consideration by the council. So a motion is one way to do it. If there is no motion, or if there is no one who offers the ordinance tonight for consideration, that would have the same effect, and there would be an ordinance to vote on tonight.
We would be wise to take the action tonight on the breed that's almost 30% of all of the animals that we use there. But I hear that there's not support for that around the dais.
Continue the ordinance in front of us until, if we can, a time specific, say in the month of June, has the effect of tabling the matter for tonight. I think it's a motion to table, although those words weren't used. To the extent that persons want to talk about a breed-specific ban, prohibition at that time, mandatory requirement at that time, they could.
It'd be preferable from a perspective of knowing that the budget's already done.
Hearing my colleagues speak, it seems to me that there are enough members of the council who would vote this motion, not the motion, but the ordinance down tonight. And I am persuaded by a comment that was whispered to me that we have invited the public to speak, and they have been gracious enough to stay long to be heard. I would not support the motion that is currently on the floor. I'm more interested, if it comes to it, that the council would take an action on the ordinance that's before us tonight, given the fact that the majority of the council has already spoken and said they are not in support of this ordinance.
Mayor, I agree with what John just said. People have been sitting here for 3 hours. Whether we vote to table or not, they need to be heard. And so,
I don't disagree with that.
so I think that it would probably be of value before we take, we may ultimately determine it makes sense to table this and combine it, as has been suggested, with a discussion on the alternate proposal. But I think since these people have been sitting here all this time, and since we are going to have to hear from them one way or another, before we vote on the motion to table, let's hear what they have to say and then decide whether we want to table it or vote it up or down tonight. We've got a lot of information. I share the concern that the Humane Society isn't here to answer some pretty basic questions. So that's disappointing, certainly. But I think we should hear. Before we take a vote on the tabling, I think we should hear from the public.
The problem with that is, if we do all that, and still don't know what voting it down means. I think we would just take no action. I can bring it back, and I will. So
I'll just offer it so that we get a vote on it.
And I'll bring it back again in July. I mean, so my point here is, the public should be heard when we're actually ready to make a decision.
Well, but I think most of us are ready to make it.
You're ready to make a decision. So then, it's your intent to move that we adopt an all-breed ban tonight? I'll support that.
It's not my intent.
We're not acting. We're not acting.
We'd be acting on this. Look, there have been a whole series of proposals here aimed at solving a problem that I don't think we can solve. And so, at least not through this approach. So I do think that the action that the council took to take up the matter of the all-breed solution or spay and neuter thing proposal is a prudent thing to discuss after the canvass has been completed. In the interim, you brought the idea of taking the single breed legislation. That has stirred a tremendous amount of community interest. We've all been bombarded, mostly you, with information and earnest points of view. I think we should close that loop, and I think we should do it tonight.
But what I'm telling you is it won't be closed. They'll all come back again when we talk about the all-breed, because contained within that will be the question of whether, I guarantee you what the Humane Society is going to come in and talk about is resources and enforcement and all those issues. And it may well be that I will offer this same exact solution.
Well, that's up to you.
You're right. But my point is that a motion to table allows the community to speak when we're actually going to do something. What you're saying is we're not going to do anything.
What I'm saying is that they're here to speak tonight. They've been sitting here patiently. We should hear from them. That's all.
Thank you.
And Mayor, there are members of the public that are in 2 floors down in the basement. Their cards are green. So what I let them know is that we were going to call 5 people at a time to give them ample time to come up from the downstairs overflow. So we've given their cards the green color so that we know that they're downstairs.
Uh, 4,198 dogs were taken into the shelter. 676 dogs were humanely euthanized. That's about a 16% rate. And then 27% of those dogs on average are pit bull, which equates to about 183 pit bull dogs euthanized in 2012. Of those dogs euthanized, 51.4% had serious medical issues, were underage or underweight. 45.2% of those euthanized had behavior issues such as extreme aggression or fear, and 3.4% of those animals had no placement opportunities.
Thank you. So, 183 in 1 year, over years, that's going to really add up to hundreds and hundreds of pit bulls. I guess that's funny to you. Hundreds and hundreds of animals.
Ladies and gentlemen,
I think we're sort of talking past one another. The research that I've read says there's something like 4 to 4.5 million dog bites in this country a year. A couple of the speakers joked about being bitten by a cat and all that. But remember, at the very top of the meeting, I said, we're not talking about incidents, period. We're talking about severe attacks. The severity of the danger, really. Not even aggression, particularly, but the severity of the injury. I mean, I suppose all dogs bite. But it does seem to me, when you look at the data, that in a very disproportionate number, when pit bulls bite, it's more severe. Now, there is research that says there are some reasons for that. And again, I'm not endorsing the research, I'm just telling you what I have read. What that research says is that pit bulls have been bred to fight and to kill. And I think one of the speakers talked about a ring of 50 pit bulls that were in a fighting ring. And that, again, is my understanding that when there are dog fighting sort of operations, which are horribly illegal and cruel, that they tend to be this breed. I read research that said that their jaws are extremely strong. That their jaws are extremely strong. They're not.
Actually,
Okay.
German Shepherds
So,
doesn't really have jaws.
yeah, we're not talking about German Shepherds, we're talking about pit bulls. And are their jaws really, really strong? And do they actually bite using the strength of their jaws in a way that is different? There is research that says, yes, yeah, listen. You listen with your ears. And that they bite and they grab and they hold on and they shake and they don't let go. So the data says there are about 4% of the dog population in our country. And so you turn and you look, okay, the severe attacks, well, there's not a lot of data on severe attacks, but there is a lot of data, very specific data on fatal attacks. So 4%, if as everyone says, I'm wrong, I'm lying, then 4% of the fatalities would be pit bulls. Any right-thinking person would, especially when you sit in our seat, and you say, we've got an obligation to protect the community. Why are 4% of the dog population responsible for these kinds of fatal and severe attacks? And clearly there's something that should be examined. And so I come here, trust me, there's no political mileage to be gained from this issue. And just look at the folks. And it seems like a lot of them are talking about the personality of the dog, or if properly cared for, the dogs can be wonderful pets. I grant you all of that. I'm just saying, if you look at the data, there is both physical evidence and numeric evidence to suggest that a right-thinking person in our position would have to take this issue on and figure out why, at least why. Pardon me? Did you say I'm wrong?
Yes.
Did pit bulls kill Samuel's Zuniga, the
Pit
2-year-old?
bulls have different jaws.
No,
They have
answer
to
my
be
question.
classified as a different species.
Did pit bulls kill Samuel's Zuniga? But I'm not particularly concerned that, one of my multi-poos is going to kill somebody. They might bite somebody or hit somebody, but if that's what the legislation should say, and a number of the people said, oh, you're going to take away my dog or kill my dog, that's not what a spay and neuter ordinance would do. There is research that says that 92% of the dogs involved in fatal attacks are males, and that of those, 94% are not neutered males. So clearly there would be some basis, if that data, again, I'm not endorsing it, I'm just reporting what I've read. If that data is accurate, that would suggest that a spay and neuter ordinance could have a positive effect.
I, for one, would invite my colleagues to vote no on the motion as I am, and that we deal with the ordinance itself tonight. The reason for that is, there are about 100 plus folks who have arrived tonight to talk on this issue, to share their intellectual and personal hands-on experience about this issue. And from the vantage point of my colleagues who have already spoken, there seems no appetite for breed-specific legislation. However, there seems to be more consideration as it relates to all breeds, and as it relates to the only attack that I know of on a police officer in the city of Pasadena, who I worked with when I worked for the Pasadena Police Department, was by a German Shepherd police dog. And most German Shepherds, as I remember when I was involved in police work, are taught to bite and hold the suspect as opposed to rip the skin. But one of our officers, out of respect, that will not name him, was ripped from the hand all the way up the arm, and he's still on the Pasadena Police Department. It took some time for him to heal. My point, anecdotally but empirically, it seems to be supported as well, as I've said previously, that the dog owner is in large measure responsible for the conduct of the dog, how that dog is trained, how you treat that animal. And this breed-specific proposed ordinance is not a solution for the problems that my colleague, at least one of my colleagues, genuinely and appropriately has brought to our attention, and he needs to be respected for bringing it to our attention. And healthy debate has taken place, but I don't think tabling it, having heard all of the speakers and really listening to my colleagues, is the best way to approach this. So I'm going to vote no on the motion and hope that we can deal with the fundamental issue of breed-specific legislation tonight.
Mr. Corning?
Thank you, Mayor. I share John's feelings on this. I think that the proposal is well-intentioned, clearly, but but the necessity for this ordinance has not been established in my mind. I think the facts, I think we could say, are in dispute, if nothing else. And those of us that have waded through the information that people have been kind enough to provide, I think it's been very illuminating, and I think some of it was fascinating. I'm not able to reach any definitive conclusion on this one way or another, but I am persuaded, frankly, by the list of organizations objecting to breed-specific legislation, which we've been provided with, which include the American Bar Association, the AKC, the ASPCA, the American Veterinary Medical Association, the California Veterinary Medical Association, and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as the Justice Department. And I think that the most important thing to me is that there's been that the benefit of this proposal hasn't been established. There is no evidence that this kind of breed-specific legislation will reduce the number of dog bites. There is no evidence that enforceability can really be achieved. And I think the reason that we've had this big outpouring of opposition is because when you start to deal with people's pets, you're really sort of reaching into their families, and I think that before government makes a move like that and runs the risk of overreaching, that we be very clear. We need to be very clear on the benefits. We need to be very clear on the science. And we need to be very clear on the enforceability. This council hasn't shied away from being aggressive in terms of, fearing overreaching. We've adopted smoking ordinances in multifamily housing, but the science there was solid and the impacts were undeniable. And we did a plastic bag prohibition, and there again, I thought at least, I was convinced that the science was undeniable and the impact would be predictable and achievable and beneficial. So I'm persuaded that we do need to take action. And I think that the action that we should take, it should be investing city resources in educating the public and in investing in some method of making low-cost or no-cost neutering available to people who can't afford it. Because I think one of the great deterrents, apart from not educating people about neutering, is that they really can't afford it. And the notion of criminalizing low-income families, I think, is a huge mistake. But that's a discussion for when we have the mandatory neutering discussion in July, or whatever it is. But I would urge the council to listen to what they've heard tonight, to absorb the information that we've been provided with, to reject the motion to table, and to vote on the substance of the proposal tonight.
When I initially made the suggestion that we table this and we go back to our prior proposal of mandatory spay and neuter across the board, the discussion subsequently led to the fact that we should continue the hearing, which I think is the motion on the floor, and the request to continue it was so that the people that were here in the public could come back at that next meeting and be heard. But in the interim, everyone has been heard. I think when we had that discussion, we were talking about not hearing from the public, basically continuing the matter until another night, and then everyone would have to come back. Then we subsequently decided we wanted to make sure everyone who took the time to come out here tonight was heard, and they've been heard. So the way I see it, then there's no need to continue the item, because the purpose for there's no longer a purpose for continuation. We might as well just act on it.
So the motion's actually not to continue, it should just table. And,
Well-
no, let me finish. And what that can mean is it can mean it could come back or it couldn't come back. So just to clarify that. The other things I wanted to say, Mayor, are nobody was talking about criminalizing. I'm curious, used that word, but to my knowledge, we haven't been talking about any criminal sanctions here. We're just talking about public policy. The other things I just like to know for the record, how many of were there 67, 68 speakers?
And there were 55 speakers, and out of those 55, there were 18 residents of Pasadena.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Johnston, will you take a roll call vote?
Well, Mr. Jones, could we clarify the motion in line with the discussion about tabling and continuing?
Sure. The motion was to table the first reading to July 14, 2014, and direct staff to come back with options for breed-specific legislation,
All breeds, and mandatory spay, neuter, and if there were any other options, it wasn't clear if there was a third element to that.
Well, and a report on euthanasia in general, and
Full report from Pasadena Humane Society on euthanasia.
any suggestions they might have to reduce the kill rate at Humane Society. Above and beyond mandatory spay.
Councilmember Gordo,
Yes.
Councilmember Kennedy,
No.
Councilmember Madison,
Yes.
Councilmember Masuda,
No.
Councilmember McAustin,
Yes.
Councilmember Twinick,
No.
Vice Mayor Robinson,
Yes.
Mayor Bogard.
Yes.
The motion passes 5 in favor, 3 against.